Star Wars: The Rise of Skywalker will end the Skywalker saga and leave Disney to explore other aspects of the Star Wars universe. But will there be any fans left who will want to explore the Star Wars universe with them by that point? Or will the damage inflicted upon the brand by the sequel trilogy be too great to overcome? Unlike Disney's earlier and arguably more successful acquisitions, Pixar and Marvel, the Lucasfilm acquisition hasn't worked out nearly as well as anyone involved had envisioned or hoped. However, with the benefit of hindsight, we can pinpoint where things went wrong and why Lucasfilm failed under Disney ownership while both Marvel and Pixar thrived. The reason we bring them up is because in some sense the Pixar, Marvel, and Lucasfilm acquisitions are all related. In this video, we will go through them all and in the process explore why the Lucasfilm acquisition alone arguably failed, and if there is any path forward. If you like the content provided in this video, then please help share it, leave a like, leave a comment, and if you haven't done so already, subscribe, and make sure you click the bell icon to indicate you want notifications every time a new video is uploaded. Much of the information that is about to be relayed comes straight from Bob Iger's book, The Ride of a Lifetime: Lessons Learned from 15 Years as CEO of the Walt Disney Company. The book is often mislabeled as his memoirs, but this is not an accurate description. The book is, if anything, a management book detailing how to be successful in business, progress in your career, and manage corporations. Each of his management principles is illustrated by case studies, and here some new information is revealed to the public. When Iger was appointed the new CEO of the Walt Disney Company in 2005, he had three specific priorities for Disney: to create branded content, to embrace the changes brought on by technology, and to become a truly global corporation. To further the first of those priorities, to create more branded content, Iger in part sought to acquire other companies and add them to the Disney portfolio. There were three in particular he had his sights set on. First, and most importantly, there was Pixar. He also wanted Marvel and Lucasfilm down the line, but Pixar was the most pressing, and it would turn out to be instrumental in acquiring Lucasfilm later on. As of 2005, Disney's own animation department was in shambles. The only successful animated movies coming out of Disney at this time were the Pixar movies. However, Pixar was an independent production company that merely had a distribution deal and co-funding deal with Disney, and that deal was about to expire. Worse yet, the relationship between the outgoing Disney CEO Michael Eisner and then Pixar CEO Steve Jobs had deteriorated to the point where it manifested itself in open hostility between the two companies. And once the deal was up, Pixar was going elsewhere. Iger knew that would be extremely detrimental to Disney, so when he started his tenure as CEO, he immediately set about to mend fences with Steve Jobs and Pixar. It took effort, but he was more than successful in this endeavor. In addition to mending the business relationship, Iger and Jobs developed a mutual respect and personal friendship, which in turn fostered a deepening business relationship between Disney and Pixar. First, the deal was extended. Then, after convincing both their respective shareholders it was the right move, Disney bought Pixar for $7.4 billion in an all-stock deal. One of the conditions of the deal was that Pixar would be allowed to remain Pixar and retain the unique culture that made them a creative powerhouse in the first place. But in addition to running Pixar, John Lasseter would also run and revive Disney Animation. The Pixar acquisition was a roaring success both for Pixar and for Disney, and time would go on to prove there had been no losing parties in that transaction. Everybody won, and everybody came out on top. Because of this, the Disney board were much more open to approving future Disney acquisitions as well. The next major acquisition was Marvel. Marvel had actually been on Disney's radar since before Iger was appointed CEO. Internal discussions about the pros and cons of a Marvel acquisition had been entertained as early as during Eisner's tenure as CEO. At that time, it had been decided that Marvel was too edgy and not consistent with the Disney brand, so nothing more had come of it. Iger, however, disagreed with the earlier assessments and decided to pursue Marvel. He was eventually able to track down Marvel's reclusive owner, Ike Perlmutter, and reassurance that Marvel would remain Marvel the same way Pixar was allowed to remain unchanged after their acquisition. Perlmutter agreed to sell. On August 31, 2009, Disney announced that they would buy Marvel Entertainment for $4 billion in a part cash, part shares acquisition. The announcement shook the world, as no hint that a deal was even in the works leaked in advance. Many felt that Disney overpaid, as Marvel didn't have the movie rights to its most famous characters. It did, however, have a prior distribution deal with Paramount, which Disney would also have to buy them out of. It should be noted that at this time, the MCU was still in its infancy, as only Iron Man and the Incredible Hulk had been released. Over the course of the next few years, as the MCU grew to be the biggest brand in entertainment history, it would become clear that Disney had, if anything, gotten a bargain. With both Pixar and Marvel now under Disney's umbrella, Iger set his sights on Lucasfilm. Bob Iger and George Lucas knew each other from before, which helped matters. Back in the early 1990s, Bob Iger had been the president of ABC Television, and in that capacity, he had both greenlit and remained extremely supportive of the Young Indiana Jones Chronicles, even when ratings had started to dwindle, something which George Lucas had appreciated a great deal. Over a lunch appointment in May of 2011, Iger very gently and very sensitively provided Lucas with some tacit reminders of what he already knew all too well. He wasn't getting any younger, he wasn't getting any fitter, and he had no plan of succession for Lucasfilm. While Lucas had children who would inherit his assets, he had no heir that could or would take over the actual running of Lucasfilm's day-to-day operations. So who would look after and maintain his life's work when he was no longer there to do the job himself? Iger didn't press the point any further and gave Lucas time to contemplate the matter. Meanwhile, Steve Jobs pointed out to Lucas that under Iger, Disney had done right by Pixar, and that probably helped sway Lucas in his decision to ultimately sell to Disney. Lucas knew Steve Jobs from before as well, as Pixar had started out as an offshoot of the Lucasfilm computer division back in 1979, before Steve Jobs bought it from him. A few months later, Lucas reached out to Iger and let him know he was willing to sell Lucasfilm and all of its associated assets, but he wanted the Pixar deal for it, meaning $7.4 billion. That was going to be a problem. When Disney bought Pixar for $7.4 billion, that included a big group of world-class engineers, seasoned directors, artists and writers, and a real production infrastructure. Included with the package were the 6 movies that were at the time already in various stages of development, the first of which would be released the same year and the subsequent ones annually after that, all of which were virtually guaranteed to be smash hits by the Pixar brand name alone. This was all factored into the $7.4 billion price tag. Likewise with Marvel, that they only paid $4 billion for. There came included a creative team, a production infrastructure, and there were at the time 3 movies in production, the first of which would be released the next year and followed by 2 movies the year after that, and down the line, possibly 3 movies a year in accordance with the company's MCU roadmap. This was all factored into that $4 billion price tag. Nothing like this was the case with Lucasfilm. While the technical divisions and animation department were busy, the movie division was, for all intents and purposes, dormant. There was nothing in the works for either Star Wars or Indiana Jones, nor was there a production pipeline. There were plenty of talented technical personnel. However, there were no creative teams that could get the ball rolling on anything, even with an infusion of cash. There was literally nothing outside of the Star Wars and Indiana Jones licenses themselves. While Pixar and Marvel were already fully functional production entities with their own unique company cultures and distinct creative drives, for Lucasfilm, Disney would have to begin anew and set up everything, the entire production pipeline, from scratch. In retrospect, this could now be seen as a red flag, as it also meant there was no established and successful operation in place. However, at the time, all it meant was that a movie was 3 years away from release. Without any movies in development and no creative team in place, the Disney bean counters arrived at the conclusion that Lucasfilm with all its assets was only worth in the vicinity of $3.6 to $3.75 billion. This was the genuine estimated market value made by the same financial experts that had previously signed off on $7.4 billion for Pixar and $4 billion for Marvel. Maybe one day the value of Lucasfilm could be increased to Pixar levels, but for what they got and what was left to do to get a new batch of Star Wars movies off the ground, the conclusion of the number crunchers was that $3.75 billion was the absolute ceiling for what they realistically could assign to Lucasfilm. Lucas understood the reasoning behind why Lucasfilm wasn't worth as much as Pixar, but less than Marvel? That would be adding insult to injury. He wanted, at the very least, the Marvel deal. In order to play ball and close the deal, Disney increased their offer for Lucasfilm to $4.05 billion. This was an acceptable increase from what Disney had shelled out for Marvel, so Lucas agreed. The deal was announced on October 30th of 2012. From Disney's point of view, however, this meant that they overpaid to the tune of nearly $500 million. This in turn only put increased pressure on Star Wars to work for them. As part of the deal, Lucas had to be available to consult, but he also had to understand that Disney were now the ones that ultimately called the shots. Relinquishing that control was hard for Lucas, since he had ruled Star Wars single-handedly for so long. This may have been the reason that in June of 2012, while the acquisition was in the works but not yet a done deal, George Lucas appointed Kathleen Kennedy to succeed him as Lucasfilm chairman. This way, Kennedy would be included with the acquisition and continue to serve as Lucasfilm chairman even under Disney ownership. Although this has never been stated as the reason why, Lucas's intention behind installing a new chairman of his own choosing right before Disney could appoint their own was quite possibly to ensure that there would be someone high up at Lucasfilm to protect his vision and side with him if there ever was a disagreement between him and Disney over the direction of Star Wars. On paper, this seemed like a good idea. The fatal mistake was choosing Kathleen Kennedy, who, as it would turn out, would be anything but loyal to him and his vision. At first glance, Kathleen Kennedy appears to be a terrific producer. For more than 3 decades, she's produced countless films which are considered classics, masterpieces, or both. She has served on a number of advisory boards, and she has been awarded a Grammy Award in recognition of her outstanding support of student filmmaking, a Women in Film Crystal Award, and most recently, she was appointed Honorary Commander of the Order of the British Empire for services to film production in the United Kingdom. Upon closer examination, however, virtually all of this can be attributed to her extensive working relationship with George Lucas and Steven Spielberg, both of whom are among the greatest filmmakers of all time. All of the great movies she worked on were either written by Lucas, directed by Spielberg, or both. To which extent her input as a producer made Spielberg's movies better is unknown. Spielberg initially hired her as an assistant, but apparently she was a terrible typist who was only kept on due to her good production ideas. Although the movie where she had the most input prior to becoming chairman of Lucasfilm was Jurassic Park 3, the film which ended the Jurassic Park franchise for a decade and a half, up until the reboot by Colin Trevorrow. There was nothing in her resume to indicate that she was ready to run a studio, nor that she had the slightest affection for the Star Wars brand. If Lucas had indeed hired her to protect his interests and his vision for Star Wars under Disney's ownership, his hopes were dashed early on. Lucas wrote an outline for a sequel trilogy, which we've previously covered here at Midnight's Edge. To briefly recap, Iger bought this outline, but made it clear that it was up to Disney whether or not they would follow it, and if they did, to which extent. Upon reading it, Iger came to be of the opinion that Lucas's vision wasn't the direction he felt was the right one. This is where Kathleen Kennedy had the opportunity to stand up for Lucas's vision and his sequel trilogy treatment. Lucas himself no doubt hoped that she would, as that may have been the reason why he hired her in the first place. She didn't. Instead, she sided with Iger. Alongside director J.J. Abrams, they came up with a new vision for the sequel trilogy, which Kennedy ensured would come with a hefty side order of intersectional political ideology. Upon its release, George Lucas was immensely disappointed with The Force Awakens because it didn't bring anything new to the table. For the second part of the trilogy, The Last Jedi, Kathleen Kennedy hired Rian Johnson, who, by all accounts, would proceed to deviate from the sequel trilogy outline Abrams, Kennedy, and Iger originally had agreed upon. To which extent he deviated is known to only those involved. Abrams himself stated that Johnson didn't really derail his original sequel trilogy plans, although admitting else would have been a PR nightmare. The Last Jedi marks the spot where all the success indicators started pointing downwards for Star Wars. Its huge box office opening was followed by a sharp drop-off in the subsequent weeks. This is where a large section of the hardcore fans turned on the franchise, and in its aftermath, toy sales, the Han Solo feature film, and the Galaxy's Edge attraction at Disney resorts all tanked. Right now, it is up to J.J. Abrams to salvage this iteration of Star Wars, the legacy of which will be influenced by how well he manages to stick the landing with the rise of Skywalker. What separated the Lucasfilm acquisition from the Pixar and Marvel acquisitions was that with Lucasfilm, there came no production pipeline and creative powers with the projects waiting to be realized. Instead, there came the last-minute addition of Kathleen Kennedy, who was given a large role in forming all of this, a role for which she wasn't the right person. In his book, there are many executives Iger worked with across the years that receive a ton of praise. About Kathleen Kennedy, he merely says that she came along with the Lucasfilm package, and that's about it. When her contract was renewed, Disney did not announce it, or otherwise show any kind of public support to their chairman, who was by then under fire. Instead, Kennedy's camp had to leak her renewal to the entertainment media, as if it were an inside scoop of production trouble. Kennedy can't be fired on account of being too high-profile a female executive over a franchise that has made social justice its domain. However, she's been sidelined and is unlikely to be extended beyond her current contract. For better or worse, the Skywalker saga is done. How audiences will respond to the final chapter of the sequel trilogy remains, but it will be followed by a new chapter in the Star Wars saga regardless, and by many accounts, Marvel guru Kevin Feige will have a big role in shaping it. But will he be able to create excitement over another story set in the Star Wars universe? Or now, is it just too late? Was there something Disney could have done earlier, and if so, what? Let us know in the comments.